The film opens with Linda and her little daughter in a tense therapy session. During the session, the girl describes her mother as stretchable, someone who bends under pressure and absorbs the emotions around her, while her father is firm and unchangeable. Linda tries to reject this description, insisting that she is in control, but the therapist reminds her that perception often carries more weight than intention. Linda is alone in caring for her chronically ill child. The girl suffers from a pediatric feeding disorder that prevents her from eating enough on her own, which means she must receive nightly nutrition through a feeding tube connected directly to her stomach. Each day, Linda drives her to a specialized hospital program, monitors her meals, and manages the strict routines that are meant to help her gain weight. Her husband Charles works as a ship captain and is frequently away for long stretches, leaving Linda to shoulder the responsibility alone. For a time, she manages the pressure until a sudden disaster changes everything. One evening, water begins flooding their bathroom, and when Linda investigates, she discovers that the ceiling has collapsed, leaving a massive hole that makes the apartment unsafe to live in. With no immediate solution available, she is forced to move herself and her daughter into a rundown motel while waiting for repairs. The temporary situation quickly becomes permanent. The contractor responsible for fixing the damage disappears, and the hole remains unrepaired, growing into a constant reminder of everything Linda cannot control. Life in the motel becomes claustrophobic and exhausting. The feeding machine hums through the night, making restful sleep impossible, and Linda begins spending long evenings outside the room just to escape the sound. Her coping mechanisms grow increasingly unhealthy. She drinks wine, smokes marijuana, and listens to music in the parking lot late into the night while her daughter sleeps inside. Sometimes she leaves the room to check on the apartment, hoping for progress that never comes. While living at the motel, she meets Diana, the blunt front desk clerk, and James, a handyman who lives next door. James becomes an unexpected source of support, offering conversation and companionship during her sleepless nights and even entertaining her daughter with small tricks and distractions. However, even this connection eventually turns into another crisis when Linda brings him to inspect the damaged apartment in hopes that he might help assess the situation. While exploring the weakened structure, James falls through the compromised floor and breaks his leg. Linda calls an ambulance, but instead of staying, she panics and leaves. At the same time, her professional life as a psychotherapist is becoming just as overwhelming as her personal one. Her patients are struggling in ways that mirror her own fears. One of Linda's patients during this time is Caroline, a new mother who has recently given birth to a baby named Riley. From their session together, it is clear that Caroline is struggling with intense postpartum anxiety. She describes a constant feeling that something is wrong, even when everything appears normal. She tells Linda that her baby doesn't seem comfortable around her and that he looks at her in a way that makes her uneasy. She worries that something bad is happening to him, but cannot explain what that might be. Linda tries to approach the situation clinically, asking whether there is anything specific that is causing these fears. Caroline cannot point to anything concrete, but insists that the feeling is real and overwhelming. She also expresses that she cannot leave Riley alone, even for a short time, because she feels she must protect him from something undefined but dangerous. When Linda suggests practical solutions, such as asking someone she trusts to watch the baby briefly so she can rest, Caroline becomes distressed and references a real news story about a nanny harming children, using it as justification for why she cannot trust anyone. Linda explains that such cases are rare and encourages her to focus on grounding herself when panic arises. She suggests simple coping strategies, such as placing Riley safely in his crib and taking time to calm down before returning to him. Caroline listens, but remains unconvinced that these fears are irrational. Later, she calls Linda outside of their scheduled sessions. The call is not an emergency, but Caroline explains that she followed Linda's advice by taking a walk with the baby after calming herself down and felt she should report back. Linda reminds her that the emergency contact number is meant for urgent situations, not updates. Caroline becomes apologetic and embarrassed, worried that she has done something wrong. Although the conversation ends politely, It reveals how dependent Caroline has become on Linda's reassurance. The situation escalates during their next in-person session. Caroline arrives with Riley and initially seems calmer, but midway through the session, she says she needs to use the bathroom. She leaves the room, expecting to return shortly. Instead, she does not come back. After waiting and realizing something is wrong, Linda checks outside and finds that Caroline has left the building entirely, leaving Riley behind in the office. The baby begins to cry, and Linda is forced to take responsibility for him while trying to figure out what to do next. She attempts to contact Caroline by phone, but receives no response. Linda then calls Caroline's husband to explain the situation and asks him to come immediately to pick up the child. He reacts with frustration and disbelief, initially assuming that Caroline must simply be nearby. When he realizes she is truly gone, he refuses to leave work, suggesting that Linda should bring the baby to him instead. Linda refuses, insisting that this is an emergency and that he must come himself. When he continues to decline, she calls the police. Eventually, an officer arrives and takes Riley, while attempts are made to locate Caroline. During another session with a male patient, he tells her about a dream he had. In this dream, he says Linda kissed him. He brings it up as something that felt real to him emotionally, even though he knows it wasn't. He explains that after waking up from the dream, he felt intense guilt, as if something inappropriate had actually happened. He says he felt like he had done something wrong. Linda reminds him that this was only a dream. Meanwhile, her husband continues to check in from afar, but his calls often turn into tense conversations rather than support. During one of these late-night phone calls, he becomes concerned when he realizes that Linda has stepped outside the motel room while their daughter is still inside. He asks her directly why she would leave their child alone, even for a moment. Linda tries to downplay it, saying she's only right outside and needs some air after being trapped in a room for so long. Charles presses further, asking what would happen if their daughter woke up frightened or needed help. In response, Linda tells him that she has someone there. She says she has arranged for a babysitter. When Charles asks who it is, she explains that it's James, the man who lives at the motel and helps with maintenance. Meanwhile, at the hospital program, the pressure intensifies when doctors warn that if her daughter does not reach a specific weight goal within the week, her treatment plan will be reassessed. This likely means the feeding tube will remain in place indefinitely. Linda begins to believe that the tube itself is preventing recovery, convincing herself that as long as it exists, her daughter will never learn to eat independently. Her exhaustion deepens, and the instability around her grows. During a group session for parents, when a supervising doctor reassures everyone that their children's illnesses are not their fault, Linda reacts with frustration. She insists that it must be their fault in some way, because if they bear no responsibility, then they have no control over the outcome. Also, Linda regularly attends therapy sessions with a male therapist while she's dealing with her daughter's illness and the chaos in her personal life. In one of the early sessions, Linda talks about how she experiences time. She explains that instead of feeling like something that moves forward, time feels like a series of obstacles she has to get through. Each task feels like reaching a cliff edge, only to discover that another one immediately follows. This gives the sense that she doesn't see an endpoint, only ongoing survival. During another session, Linda becomes frustrated with the structure of therapy itself. When the therapist ends the session without warning, she complains that she didn't get a chance to talk about something important, a dream she had. She insists on sharing it quickly. She describes a dream where she was in a hospital room, waiting for her husband to arrive so they could leave together. Instead, her therapist was there. In the dream, he sat close to her, and she felt him moving even closer as she tried to shift away. She explains that she took out her phone in the dream because she was worried her husband might walk in and misunderstand what was happening. In response, the therapist tried to grab the phone, then he began tickling her to make her drop it. Linda admits that in the dream, she enjoyed the interaction, even while feeling anxious about being caught. The therapist listens and suggests they can talk about it in a future session. Later, Linda becomes more dependent on therapy as the stress in her life grows. In one session, she asks directly for instructions about what she should do regarding her daughter's treatment. She lays out the numbers she's been given by doctors, the weight goal, the calorie intake, and asks him plainly how she is supposed to achieve it. He does not give her a directive. Instead, he suggests that what she needs most is rest and stability. Linda becomes visibly frustrated, saying she doesn't need comfort, but an actual solution. She asks why he doesn't simply tell her what to do, implying that his neutrality feels like abandonment. He tells her that she already knows what to do and that she doesn't truly want him to make decisions for her. As the sessions continue, Linda reveals more about her past. She tells him that she once became pregnant years earlier and chose to terminate it shortly after learning about it. She describes the procedure and admits that she sometimes wonders what her life would have been like if she had kept that child. She becomes emotional while talking about this and says that she feels like someone who was never meant to be a mother. Her therapist listens, but does not respond with reassurance. Eventually, the tension between them reaches a breaking point. Linda accuses him of withholding guidance and failing to help her in a practical way. He responds by saying that the therapeutic relationship is no longer working and tells her that they cannot continue seeing each other. Their professional relationship ends. One night, Linda receives an email from her patient Caroline, who is still missing. It includes a video attachment and a message in all caps that reads, "I'm not trying to be like her." When Linda opens the video, she sees interrogation-style footage of a woman who unalived her own children during a mental health crisis. The woman is speaking about her actions and referencing a belief that harming them was, in her mind, preferable to allowing them to suffer. Soon after, Caroline reappears at the motel in the middle of the night, seeking Linda's help. Linda tries to persuade her to go to a hospital for treatment, but Caroline lashes out and runs away toward the beach. Linda follows her into the darkness, but eventually loses sight of her. By the time she returns to the motel, Linda feels certain that something must change. Convinced that the feeding tube is the obstacle preventing her daughter's recovery, she removes it herself without medical supervision. After removing the feeding tube from her daughter, Linda runs back to the apartment, still overwhelmed and unsure of what she has just done. Inside their bedroom, she is surprised to find her husband Charles already there. He has come home earlier than expected after sensing that something was wrong during their recent conversations. He explains that he wanted to take control of at least one part of the situation, so he arranged for the repairs to finally be completed. The hole in the ceiling has now been fixed. To him, this feels like a step toward restoring order. He suggests that they go back to the motel, relieve the babysitter, and try to rest. Linda agrees, even though she knows there is no babysitter. When they arrive at the motel room, Charles approaches the door, expecting to meet the man he believes Linda hired to watch their daughter. Instead, they find James inside. At first, Charles assumes that James is the babysitter and thanks him for staying with their child. James explains that he was never asked to watch the girl and only entered the room because he heard her crying and frightened. After knocking repeatedly, she eventually let him in. James says that when he found her, she was scared and alone and that her stomach was bleeding. He had applied a bandage without fully understanding what had happened, simply trying to help. As he speaks, Charles begins to realize that something is wrong. He turns to Linda and asks why their daughter was alone in the first place. Then he notices that the feeding machine is off and the tube is no longer connected. Their daughter, who has been listening from inside the room, becomes excited and says that she no longer needs the tube and that she can go back to school. Her reaction makes it clear that she believes everything is suddenly resolved. This only deepens Charles's concern. He asks Linda what she has done. Unable to answer him clearly and overwhelmed by the confrontation, Linda leaves the motel. She runs to the beach, where she enters the ocean in a state of desperation, as if trying to escape the overwhelming guilt and pressure that have consumed her. The waves repeatedly pull her under before pushing her back toward the shore. Eventually, she collapses from exhaustion. When she regains consciousness, her daughter is beside her, gently calling for her to wake up. At that moment, Linda promises that she will do better, and her daughter responds with a small smile. The film ends without offering certainty about what comes next, leaving them together in a moment that suggests survival rather than resolution. This is actually one of those endings where the point isn't what literally happened, but what the collapse means. And that lines up very closely with how Rose Byrne herself has talked about the film. From Byrne's perspective, Linda is not meant to be interpreted as a hero or a villain, or even someone we fully solve. She has described Linda as deliberately polarizing, someone the audience is meant to struggle with, rather than neatly understand. And that becomes essential when thinking about the ending. By the time we reach the final sequence, Linda has lost almost every external structure that once held her together. Her professional authority is gone. She fails Caroline and is fired by her own therapist. Her maternal competence is gone. She removes the feeding tube in a moment that is both desperate and delusional. Her physical stability is gone. The apartment literally collapses, and the motel becomes a liminal space where she increasingly drifts from reality. Her identity as the one who fixes people is gone. The ocean sequence is not about taking her own life in a literal sense. It's about annihilation, the fantasy of escaping the role she believes she was never meant to hold. Earlier, Linda confesses to her therapist she might have gotten rid of the wrong one when she had terminated her first pregnancy years ago. That thought sits inside her like poison. By the end, motherhood has become something she considers as fundamentally incompatible with who she is. Running into the ocean feels less like a desire to end her life, and more like an attempt to escape the role and identity she feels trapped inside. But the sea refuses her. Each time she goes in, she is thrown back. There is no clean escape or reset. And when she wakes up on the beach beside her daughter, the film gives us something very small and very uncomfortable instead of resolution. She promises to be better, not to fix things. And the daughter smiles, not because she's healed, but because their bond still exists despite everything. That aligns strongly with Byrne's own framing of the film as part of a wave of stories interrogating motherhood and identity, not as something sacred and instinctive, but as something that can fracture a person's sense of self. The end. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And until next time.